In this video, I want to talk to you about brick spalling. Spalling is a technical term that refers to a certain kind of flaking of, well, all masonry materials, but in this case we're talking about brick. And the cause of spalling, and this is a prime example of pretty disappointing spalling happening here right now, the cause of it is always the same, and that's moisture that has been absorbed into the brick before temperatures below freezing. So if a little bit of moisture is absorbed, it's not enough to cause spalling. But if enough moisture is absorbed, then there's sufficient moisture within the pores of the brick that moisture expands when it freezes, as all water does, and it exerts a tremendous amount of force. Water expands about 9% when it freezes, and that's a huge amount. So what we've got here are like little jackhammers or little hammers or something working inside the brick, knocking off chunks. And this takes years to happen, but you don't want it to happen at all. Now, in this case, this kind of spalling is 100% the fault of the brick manufacturer. And you can prove that to yourself because some of the brick is fine, and it was all laid at the same time. So this is brick from different batches or different parts of the same batch, and for whatever reason, the brick was not fired hot enough and long enough to reduce the absorbency of the brick so that it could survive cold climates without a problem. Now the mortar joints here have survived. They didn't absorb too much, and that's why they're sticking out, trying their best to do their job. But yeah, the brick is toast. There's nothing that can be done to fix this. All you can do is understand the cause and implement some sort of preventative measures when you're having your brickwork done. Another shot here. This photo was taken from the sidewall of the bowling alley in Espanola, Ontario, Canada. And classic example of bricks that have a manufacturing defect. Same thing here. You see this sort of thing, and it's always a bit pathetic. I mean, look up here. Someone's tried to fix this, or stopgap, something, or it's not going to do any good whatsoever. It's just your full-blown train wreck right now, and replacement is the only option, I'm afraid. Now, that's why this thing is so important. Okay, this is an upright freezer in the testing lab of a brick factory. So modern bricks that are manufactured properly and that meet certain standards have representative samples from each batch of bricks soaked in water for a certain period of time so that it's as saturated as it's going to get. And then they move those bricks into a freezer like this. This freezer is especially wired to go through many freeze-thaw cycles, dozens and dozens of them. Far more than you'd see in real life. And the idea is to stress these bricks to verify with certainty that that particular batch of bricks is impervious enough to moisture absorption that spalling won't be a problem. So essentially, a test like this is going to be subjecting bricks to what might amount to 100 years of freeze-thaw cycles in the real world, maybe even more. It depends on how they test. But the bottom line for you is quite simple, and that's to use brick that has been moisture tested like this, especially if you live in an area that gets below freezing. So that's pretty simple. Not all bricks have been tested this way, so you're going to want to ask about that. And, well, this is what you're trying to avoid. This is another classic example of poorly manufactured bricks that will never last. And, from the looks of things, you see up here, that looks like the edge of a roof. That looks like a drip edge or something. So we could have something else going on here other than just bad brick. And that has to do with moisture control around a building. Now, this is a classic example of poor moisture control around a building, because these bricks, they're pretty good. I mean, they're cracked and they're chipped and they're old, but they're not spalling, which means that they're not absorbing too much water and having that water expand when it freezes and pop the bricks apart. But what has happened here is a complete destruction of the mortar joints. So clearly there's a moisture issue here, a water issue. And in this case, it's almost certainly caused by poor water control. I mean, first of all, the bricks get close to the ground. That's a problem. They should never be any closer than about 6 or 8 inches. I prefer a foot above the ground because that's where there's splashed water. You know, rain falls, splashes up on the wall repeatedly over the years, and it can cause problems. But in this case, as I said, the bricks are fine. You can't really fault the bricks. So this is an issue of the builder or the owner of the building who didn't maintain proper water control off the roof. You know, I don't know what's going on here, but it could be water pouring off the roof. It could be a bad eaves trough. We do have the problem of the bricks being too close to the ground, so that's nothing much that can be remedied at this stage. But it's important to make the distinction between bad brick and a bad owner or a bad builder. And this is clearly a bad builder / bad owner situation. Another one here. What we've got is a deck floor that's bolted to some brick veneer. Now, that's a problem on 2 counts because brick veneer is not rated to carry the load of a deck. There are other ways of fastening a deck to a brick veneered building that I cover later in the course, but that's the first problem. The second problem is that there were no spacers behind this wood. This wood was bolted directly to the brick, and it held moisture. You know, water would get in there, it would be held against the brick, and the brick would absorb in a way that it normally wouldn't because it's not having water held against it. A better option would have been to apply some spacers, maybe 1/2 inch thick or so, that move this piece of wood away from the brick. If that had happened, we wouldn't be having this deterioration here, so well worth the trouble. You've seen this photo before elsewhere in the course, and this is a bad builder thing, not a bad brick thing. Because I know the house, I know this house, I've seen it, watched it over the years. It's probably 40 years old now, and every single brick is fine except the bricks that they actually buried. I suppose when the mason was working here laying these bricks, the ground level was lower than it is now because they're building it right on the concrete foundation. But what with backfilling and installing these paving bricks for the driveway, and one whole course of bricks came underground, and that's why that brick is deteriorating. You just can't be close to the ground if you want your bricks to last in a cold climate, or in any climate that gets below freezing. So this is a builder error, not a bricklayer error, not a brick factory error. Now this is an interesting photo here. There's nothing wrong with these bricks because they're being installed right now. This building is owned by a friend of mine. It's a commercial building in a small town. She bought the building, and it had brick on it before, but the brick had been painted, just painted with regular paint. And unfortunately, that paint held moisture. It held moisture against the brick. Winter came. There was all kinds of spalling and deterioration. And like I said before, the only solution for that is replacement. So they knocked all the old bricks off, and this mason is installing bricks in a kind of a little bit of a traditional style with the dark red and the light tan color. The bricks originally would have been fine, and I know that because identical bricks in other buildings that are neighboring this one were fine. The issue was painting, and painting with a paint that didn't allow moisture to escape. I mean, the issue is really quite simple. You might think, well, if I'm putting paint on the brick, and if paint can hold the moisture into the brick, isn't it going to keep all the moisture out of the brick too? Well, the problem with that, and you see it all the time in building situations, is that it only takes the tiniest little breach in a waterproof membrane or a film like paint. It only takes the tiniest breach of that to let plenty of water in. But once the water is in, almost none of it can get out because it can only get out through that tiny little breach that let it in the first place. So I guess in other words, it's easy to let liquid water in. It's quite a bit harder, very hard, to let water vapor come back out again through the tiny little breach that let the liquid in the first place. So that's why regular painting is bad, and why you either don't paint, or you paint with a breathable paint, or you stain your bricks, which is another even safer option. It actually looks better than paint too. And of course, all the while making sure that you build with bricks that have been verified and certified as being weatherproof and spall resistant.